Hello, I'm Oriana Fox. Thank you for tuning in to Multiple O's, the spin-off podcast for my talk show, The O Show, which explores the crossover between working on the self and working to change the world. My guests include artists and other experts who expose their lives, bodies, and experiences to challenge expectations and conventions. In other words, they have skin in the game. So if you're interested in candid confessions, nonconformity, creativity, and mental health, you've come to the right place. Hello, listeners. Thanks for tuning in. This is your host, Oriana, and I'm an artist with a PhD in self-disclosure. As discussed in the previous episode, the themes that I explored in that PhD are very much the same themes of this podcast. That is self-disclosure, shame defiance, and speaking truth to power. Back when I was deeply immersed in that research, when I was piling it high and deep, if you will, I conducted a number of interviews with performance artists whose work I felt exemplified the overlapping of shamelessness and critique. And so this week I'm sharing one of those interviews with you. And so bear in mind, the sound quality isn't the best. It was not recorded with the intention to become a podcast. It was purely for research purposes. So bear that in mind. I don't have my usual kind of, public-facing persona on. I'm just, a researcher. Anyway, it was conducted in 2017 when my interviewee was beginning to make a splash in the UK live art scene. She was showing her work at festivals all around the country and abroad, including Spill in Ipswich, In Between Time Festival in Bristol, Ecos in Bilbao, Pulse International Performance Art Festival in Chicago, among others. She also, many years later, went on to become the co-director of the Live Art Development Agency. And currently, she lives and works in Abu Dhabi, where she's a professor of live art and social practice at NYU. I'm talking about none other than the award-winning Nigerian-born British artist, Chinasa Vivian Ezugha. The focus of our discussion was a work that she was touring around that time, or she was just finishing up having toured for several years, entitled Because of Hair. And for those of you who have not experienced it, it entailed the artist wearing an elaborate mask of hair, a mask that she constructed from found and donated hair of all types. And in the interview, we discussed this piece at length, as well as her relationship to hair and its politics. And we also go on to discuss the work she was developing at the time. I was really fascinated to revisit this discussion, and I find it really powerful, and I hope you do too. And I'm pleased to say that Chinasa and I have had a much more recent follow-up conversation, and that will be featured on the very next episode. So without further ado, here is my interview with Chinasa Vivian Ezugha from 2017.
The Because of Hair project started while I was at university 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And so it's been like a huge project that has expanded into this long journey. And at the moment I'm thinking, because I've performed the piece and I've used the hair masks in the way that I've wanted to use them. It's a case of now I'm just trying to kind of retrace the memories, retrace the experience, and ask myself the questions about whether to develop strands from that and how to do that and where to do that. I feel like I'm in some kind of mourning period because I've worked on the project for so long, and because the experiences with the masks were kind of good and bad. Mm-hmm. The experiences were difficult. So in some ways, I feel like at this point, I'm just mourning.
So I'm just wondering, you're saying it's been good and bad. So could you tell me a bit more, details of the good things and the bad things that have come out of the project, or the responses to it?
When I first started the project, it was like, for me, I had all these experiences that I linked to hair, coming to England, seeing my mum kind of pass away from cancer, the chemotherapy and the nature of chemotherapy, and the effects of that on the body, and the hair being this first signifying example of what the drugs was doing to her. And then kind of finding a way to gain confidence in myself and to become a stronger person, like a more confident person. I feel like the masks, because nobody could see my face, in some ways gave me the strength to really explore things that I wouldn't normally feel confident in doing. And I think that's been a great thing. And I've been able to meet so many interesting people and look at the diversity and the different politics of hair, but also to, I don't know, to create something that's uniquely to me. It's like, I feel like nobody will ever be able to imitate that hair mask because it's mine. And it will forever be mine. And the labor and the love and the joy and everything that went into it means that it's more than just an object for the arts. It's like my own. It's a kind of a vessel that holds a period in time in my life. And I guess that in itself brings about the experiences, the negative experiences that I had where, for example, like I had lecturers being, I would say, intellectually racist, and kind of trying to force upon me this idea or the Western ideology of what African art is or what Africa is, based on the fact that the hair mask reminded them of somewhat of a primitive or voodoo practice, and how that that experience tarnished the last year of my university, and the idea that I didn't have any power to say.
When was that? What year did you finish?
2014.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was. I mean, yeah, and I have found that in all the performances that I've done with the hair mask, that often the most interesting fact is that men always find themselves. I always find that the men become very frightful. They start to become very uncomfortable, almost like as if they're being confronted by themselves, and there's always this. I've always had this kind of discussions with different people where they're never sure if it's a female or a male presence in the room, because there's so many different shifts going on within the performance. Because the hair mask is so big and kind of stands out, it's an ornament that, but at the same time, it's a tool. It's a powerful tool. There's a fear of like not knowing if it's a human or if it's a creature, and I think that's interesting because I always think, well, surely you must know it's me. It's a human being underneath it because you can see my hands, you can see my legs. But I think the fact that the face is a primal, it's the first place that people kind of look to identify or to build some kind of connection. And when they can't see the face, it becomes, it becomes almost void. Like the human-to-human experience becomes void. Yeah.
So that what you were talking about gaining confidence, and like in a way that's what I'm really interested in, and my PhD is very much about the artists and what they can, what performance artists in particular get from their work psychologically or whatever, or just because I think that a lot of them do gain confidence. And usually from being somewhat shameless or revealing things that might be considered shameful. So does that sort of relate to what you're talking about? Or
yeah, because the idea of hiding my face was out of shame. It was shame. It was the fear of being confronted by the looks, the other people's looks, them looking at me, judging me, because I've had that type of experience, previously. And also to confront those issues or to empower myself to see my body in a different way, to see that my body has its own power and the only way to do that was to hide my face to begin with, under this mask, to protect myself from being glared at by these people. And then through that, I started to see that I can actually use the fact that I can't be seen to be seen, to be seen in a way that is safe for me, so I can explore things that I wouldn't normally explore openly, or I could, make references to the things that, that I would find normally very difficult to make references to openly to most people.
It's fascinating to me. I'd like to know more about how the mask itself communicates, though.
So I think the mask gives has its presence that, you could pass off as being quite frightening. But I think the energy and how the mask kind of encourages like another side, another space, another feeling, another experience, means that it becomes less about what you're seeing and it's more about what you're feeling. Even though you kind of know what you're seeing, but it feels like what you're seeing is more real in your emotions than perhaps in the physical. Like it's more of a kind of, I don't know how to say it. I wouldn't say supernatural, but I think it's crosses between
unconscious, maybe, or
yeah, it's like it's touching on those things that you can't really understand, and you're not quite sure why you're feeling somehow. And because I've had people, when I have done the performance, become very violent and aggressive, and it's like, and it's weird because in some ways I've always wondered why. Because I in the performance I don't go to people to hit them. I don't insinuate any sort of violence in that way, not to others, but maybe onto myself, but not to others. And I don't really, and I would often like kind of walk close, and I always think like, in the space, people have the permission to leave. If you don't want to stay somewhere, you can leave. But I've always found it really interesting when there's some key people that will become really aggressive and become very, almost like, I'm going to assert my power now, and there's nothing you can do about it. And it's interesting because I can feel it even with the mask on. And then for me, it becomes like a negotiation, because then it's like, well, I'm in this space and I'm performing, and I have this person that's asserting this kind of aggressive nature, and is trying to assert some form of power. And it's almost like a win-lose situation. So, and then in that process, I'm asking myself, well, am I going to lose or am I going to win?
So what kind of aggressive responses have you got? Like, what happens?
When I performed in Berlin, a friend of mine invited me over. They had set up this kind of performance thing, and I came. I was going to do a residency for 2 weeks, and then but I came early so that I can do the performance the evening. And I didn't have, because at times when if I was traveling abroad, depending on the nature of the festival, I would normally I would take like the smallest mask that I have, which is easier to carry, or I would take a wig that I will manipulate in some way, and kind of sew into and cut, and then wear it as it is, as a mask. And I took the wig and I went and did the performance, and people were so cold. I mean, I've never been in a space where I felt like people really hated me. Like after the performance, nobody spoke to me. They were stepping, like at the end of the performance, I took the wig off, the mask off, and put it on the floor, kind of left the space to signify the end of the performance. And I just kind of watched them walk all over like the object. I would come and sit down after the event, and they would kind of have their backs to me. And this kind of like, yeah, it was really mean. And because of that experience, because I'm the type of person where I'm very sensitive to things and to energies and people's spaces and feelings. And often I will refuse to perform ever again in a particular city if I feel like the experience was very, very, it was negative, but negative in a violent way, and not violent in a physical sense, but more of the emotional violence. And I felt like that in Berlin. And I've never, ever been able to go back to Berlin after that, because I just can't get through that experience, because it was like as if somebody put their hands into my heart and twisted it round. Because every time I saw their feet step on the mat, it was almost like they were stepping on me. And the fact that nobody would talk to me, I mean, if they didn't, I was thinking, if you don't understand something and the artist is here, why not just ask them? You have a permission to. You had the same permission to step on my thing as you have to like come and say to me, what was that about? And even like within the performance, I had asked the organizers to ask them to stand kind of in a circle, but in a big circle, so that I had space to move around. And clearly they told them, because I heard them saying it, but the audience decided to stand in a very small circle. So they all enclosed themselves on me. And because I couldn't see, but I could smell and hear their breathing and, hear the different shuffles and different kind of breathing patterns, I knew they were really close to me. And so when I became naturally like fearful and then asserted some form of move out my way kind of motion, they became aggressive and would like laugh in my face while I had the mask on. And I just felt like I was being taunted. It was like I felt like I was in the presence of demonic people who were just like niggling and sticking needles into me slowly. So that was a horrible experience. And that's one experience that I just, after that, I said I don't think I will ever perform in Berlin again. So yeah, that was one experience.
So what's the best? What's like the best response you've received, or that you felt most happy with, or when you performed?
Do you know what? I think when I performed in Ipswich as part of the Spill Festival, I really that was an experience, because that was a mixed experience, because that I had people being racially abusive, being threatening, making comments, but all that for me, like, maybe because I had gone through what I went through in Berlin, I became very much like someone, almost like slightly aware that people can be this way within the performance. But there were times when I was performing in Ipswich where there were some really powerful moments for me. There was a woman who had been watching me, because it was it was supposed to be a 3-day durational piece, but it ended up being 2 days because things kind of got out of hand with some of the public. But during the first day, she must have watched me and then came back during the second day, and she just hugged me and started to cry, and was just so, she held on to me so tightly that it almost made me feel alive. Because I felt like at that moment when I was doing the performance outdoors, outside like the town hall in Ipswich, I felt almost like I was objectifying myself in some ways, and just kind of, I was in the space, but I was part of the space. I didn't feel so human. And the only times that I felt human was when other people, they shouted abuse, or like the woman, they hugged and they cried, or they shared something that was so unexpected. And I was really, amazed at that, because I think, and perhaps maybe that was part of the mask, is the fact that you can't see someone's face. You don't have that fear that maybe the person that you're sharing something with, or you're saying this to, you can see you, and in some ways knows you and has judged you with their eyes. Because when you look into someone's eyes, you're seeing into their soul almost. And sometimes when you're sharing something very difficult, or you're experiencing something of an emotion that's emotional and reminding you of a life, a past life, a present experience, or something, it's very hard to openly say it in a confident way when you can see the other person looking at you, because you often feel like you're being judged. I don't know how to explain it, but when you're masked, or when it's within an artistic context, and somehow the face becomes this vehicle that acts in a way opposite to the way it should act. I don't know, I think it does two things. It frightens people, and it also liberates people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you said you got racist comments, and was that from the art audience or from the general public?
That was just the general public.
Okay. I was going to say.
Some of them were just crazy. Like I had some guy call me a witch, saying that I was practicing voodoo on him. And then, one was calling me a terrorist, saying that I'm a terrorist. I'm going to blow them up, blah, blah, blah. I was kind of like, I don't see how I can blow you up, but hey, I had one lady, like, because I couldn't see them, but I could sort of, with the way their voices were positioned, I could work out where they were standing, what position they were in, and how close they were to me. And she said to her friend, she said her and her friends were having a conversation, and she asked her friend, shall I go up to her and punch her in her face? And I was kind of like, honestly, I just thought in my head, I was like, well, why would you punch me in my face? Like, you can't see me. You don't know what I look like. You don't know. I haven't done anything to you. I don't even know who you are. Like, I'm just here, just as you are. Like, you are here, and you have the right to be here. So do I. Like, regardless of whether I have a mask on my face or not, I have as much right to be here as you do. But to then suggest that, I should go up and punch her in her face, was so bizarre to me, because I thought there is no longer any law. You see, like the law, the boundaries that we often think are in place to protect us are not there when you're in a situation. I feel like the arts can dissemble the borders that are put up by society in a good way, but also in a bad way. In a bad way where it kind of enables people to think that the person is no longer a person, it's just an object. And so therefore they can abuse it if they want, and say, well, it's just an art, isn't it? It's just art. After all, like if you're a performance artist, you are essentially a sculpture, a living sculpture. So I can kind of do what I want. And that's what I felt in that moment, actually.
So I wanted to ask about how you started making performance art. Yeah.
So I originally, when I went to university, I was more or less into painting, and I would paint faces a lot because I always loved faces. Like portraits were my thing, and I guess I started to make performance more or less after I built the hair mask, because I started collecting hair because I've always been fascinated by hair, just purely on the fact of my own experiences, but also just because I've always found it interesting, the just kind of like the cultural significance of hair in our society, in different places, in different cultures, especially in African culture. And I've always wanted to perform because it's in my blood. It's like I was born in Nigeria. I grew up dancing, like I grew up being in the presence of a vibrant culture of women and men enjoying like the rhythms that are made by hand, made by instruments, made by the body, and kind of allowing the beats to hit your body in such a way where you express an inner joy or an inner sadness or something. And so I've always wanted to perform, but never really had the confidence to, because I don't know, I felt like, well, I don't know. I don't know if anyone in England would ever find that interesting or support that, for example. So when I built the hair mats, I thought, oh, maybe I could create them so that they're like sculptures, you know. And I did that. I tried it, you know, kind of placing them on planes, etc., as you do in university. But then I just thought, this shit's not going to work. Like, it has to be worn. It has to be something that has to be worn. Mm-hmm. And when I started to amend it so that it became something wearable, that's when I thought, okay, so now if it's been worn, what happens after that? And when I started to ask that question, I started to think, okay, so now I have to look at performance. I'd never really trained as a performer, in all honesty. Like, I took a few courses, modules from the theatre department at my university, but that was very kind of like, I would say theatre, mm-hmm. Like physical theatre and stuff, and wasn't something that I was interested in. And it wasn't until I left university and I had the opportunity to take part in past studies in Lithuania that I got the kind of the foundational grounding of what performance art can be and might be. And through that, I haven't stopped really. So I would probably say, like, you know, it's the fascination with creating this weird hybrid thing that can be worn, and wanting to explore movements with this thing as a worn object, and taking part in past studies that really started like performance for me.
So can we talk a bit more about hair? And like, I'm wondering about how, well, obviously your hair is very different from the hair masks.
Yeah.
But I read this review, I think you have a link to it on your website, where you say that when you were in school, some boy said he lost, what was it, like a ruler in your hair or something?
Well, what it was, I think what it may have been was when I was talking about when I was in Nigeria, we all had long hair, but we were forced to shave our hair because the female teachers, well, they said it was school policy that you had to shave your hair. If you went to a school in the villages, in the village area, more of the rural areas of the Igbo side, there's apparently the school policy is that all girls must have their hair shaved.
Why is that?
I remember speaking to my mum because I never understood it either, and she said that it's because the female teachers. She said that the schools justified it by saying that young girls tend to spend a lot of time on their hair, and if they came to school with long hair, they would not study. Essentially, they would spend more time doing their hair than doing anything else.
Right.
But my mum said that she really thinks that it wasn't about that. It was just the fact that the female teachers were very envious and would become more envious if they saw young girls with longer, beautiful hair. And we all know that somehow hair is a very sexual thing as well. And for them, it's almost like, you know, it's a competitive thing, because if a woman in her youth, her hair will flourish in a way that her body will flourish in, and therefore she'll become more attractive or be viewed more by the male suitors, etc., and could potentially outshine the older women who are flourishing in the same, you know, flourishing based on their age, based on their lifestyle, etc. And the hair is always the first thing that depicts the type of lifestyle that a person lives. Because if a person is living a healthy lifestyle, usually their hair is healthy. But if a person is living an unhealthy lifestyle, the hair is a signifier of that. But not many people know, because they don't often pay attention to those details. But it is that. So yeah, we had our hair shaved. And I remembered, like it was yesterday, when we were first getting ready to come to England, my uncle said, oh, these kids must have their hair shaved. And I remember asking him, can I have mine as it is so that it can grow? because my mum said that kids in England had long hair. So I said, oh, can I have mine? Can you not shave it so that at least there's some already there and it will continue growing when I get to England? And he said, no, you've got to look neat, is what he said. So he shaved our hair. And when we came to the UK and we started school, and, we were bullied because obviously we looked different from the rest of the kids. As girls, we had bald hair, and this was something that children weren't used to seeing. And yeah, it was different, and it became a thing of it became shameful. We went through this painful period of having to regrow our hair. So it just became this horrible process of going through this growth, growing the hair, having my hair plaited by my mom and my aunts, kind of having them pull the little bits so that it will kind of stretch the root. The pain of going through that, and then the pain of being laughed at as well, because the hairstyles were different, because it was not something that the kids in England were used to.
Yeah.
Even the black girls, they weren't used to seeing hair in that way, because that's the type of hairstyle my mum would do. Was a very Nigerian thing, and these kids were not used to seeing that. So it was altogether painful, and then having to relax our hair as well, just so that it's long and straight, apparently, because this means that it's better. And then my mum relaxing the little hair that we had so that it will be long and flowy. And then the shit falling off, So having to lose your hair and then having to cut it down again and start regrowing it again because the chemicals have damaged it was horrible.
But your hair now, I mean, it's quite short. I mean, what is your kind of approach to your own hair now? Just keep it simple.
Yeah. So I decided to cut it while I was in university, because I got tired of having to pay so much money, like 70, 80 pounds to have my hair plaited all the time, and the pain of having someone pull my hair. And I just didn't want to conform to anyone's beauty standards anymore. I didn't want to conform to the black community's beauty standards of saying, you need to have your hair in this weave. I just didn't want it anymore. And I just thought, this time I have the power to choose what I want to do with my hair. So I'm choosing to cut it, rather than me being told that you have to have your hair short to make it look neat. I'm choosing to have my hair short because I want to, because for me it's more cost effective, and I just like it short, and I enjoy it, and I don't need to justify myself as a woman to any man. My hair is my hair. Why would I subject myself to this kind of torture just for this thing called beauty? So, yeah.
Well, I guess the main reason why people do that sort of thing is to attract someone.
Yeah, for sure. But it's always, I think, when I started doing the research on the hair, I looked at hair in African culture, and obviously hair in African culture is like this surface, this canvas to depict so many different things in a person's life. But I also looked at kind of the politics of hair in Western culture, and the color of a person's hair can depict, has a social stigma. The length of a person's hair also holds another social stigma. And there's always that fear that a woman that has short hair is seen to be overly ambitious and almost quite cutting. It's like a woman who is so secure in herself that she knows every single thing that she wants, and therefore can be quite intimidating to men, because obviously somehow the world is made up in a way where it seems like men need to feel in control, to feel important. And of course that's not true, because a person can have short hair and be the most insecure being walking around. And I think often the fact that people associate things like, if you have very short hair, or if your hair is brunette and brown, then you are your character is very much like this. If you're a blonde, you're like this. If you're a redhead, you're like this. So I looked at all that within Western culture, and that was fascinating as well. It was something that I didn't think would dictate a lot, but it was powerful. Hair as a subject became a universal thing, but it was no longer about this or that. It was actually something where every culture in this world has its politics about hair. Some relate, some don't, but essentially every culture on the earth has its politics about hair.
Speaking of the politics of hair, or the politics of appearance more generally,
I find that, people often have like one set of ideals for how they are in their work, and then another for how they kind of judge themselves in everyday life. So I'm just wondering, like, in everyday life, do you ever feel like, oh, I wish I looked like this, or I wish I don't know, or what do you aspire to, like, what, like, in terms of, I don't know, what ideals do you aspire to or judge yourself by?
It's really interesting. So I have actually been working on something. It's been for some time now, and again, I always take quite long developing a project. But I've been working on this project looking at the butt, for example, ass, the buttocks and the politics of the buttocks. Oh
yeah, I saw you had those peach collage, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've been like exploring this because I've been always, again, it all goes back to the Black community. But I think this is more or less like, I don't know if it's from Africa as such, or if it's more of the contemporary Black experience and the modifying of the butt. Because I am a Black woman, but my ass is not like some other women, Black women. My ass is like fairly, I would say, quite flat in comparison to some of them. And it's been like, it's one of these things where it's like, I think it's more of a self-confidence thing, or something about my insecurity. Because I remember, like, my aunt, she would make comments like, oh, your body shape is not from our family because your mom's body shape is not like that. Your older sister's body shape is not like that. Your body shape is different. You must have got that from your dad's side because you don't even have any ass. And because of those things, I start to, I have Instagram. So on my Instagram, I purposely will look at certain pages, and I just kind of like became obsessed with the images of the ass on social media. Like the perfect idea, like the perfect body is a body that's well-toned, curvy, and big ass, and the appropriation of white women as well in the US, for example, and even all over the world now, it seems, in kind of modifying their bodies to be the Black woman, to have the Black woman's asset. And and at the same time, it's like totally disregard the oppression that has come with that body. Like, I looked at people like, of course, like Sajid Batram, and I looked at the women of the human zoos of New York and London, and this kind of the oppression and the violence that was inflicted on Black women during the time period of slavery and the colonial times, because of their body, because of that their bodies were naturally curvaceous and that. And now, now we've got Kim Kardashian, and she's this some kind of prototype of beauty. And I'm like, what the hell? If Kim Kardashian existed in the time of the human zoos, I wondered if she would have been abused and used as kind of displayed as an animal, or if she would be hailed as this beautiful woman. And it's the violent appropriation of culture that gets to me. But at the same time, that's the political side of things. Like now,
so do you think this new stuff on the butt is going to be humorous? Because your work is quite serious, I think, on the whole. I mean, am I wrong? Yeah, it's very serious.
Yeah, I think it will be serious.
It will be serious?
But I'm trying to find something funny because I really want to like.
Well, I like the fact that you said assets. That's funny.
I just think, like it's crazy. I look at Instagram and I'm like, whoa, it's just like, what's going on? Like everybody's got really small waist and really huge plump tomatoes on their backs. And then I become obsessed because I'm like, I wonder what my body would look like if I really had like asses like this. Like, I mean, and then I sometimes question as well, like, well, how do they fit into jeans? Because that ass is so big. Like, how are they able to breathe? And it becomes, I start to have a joke because I'm like, I can't understand this. I find it difficult to wear like jeans, never mind someone whose ass is twice the size of mine, and they're like wearing really nice fitted jeans. And I'm like, but I can't even find nice fitted jeans. So what's going on? What's your secret? It's just like, wow. And it seems like it's an American culture as well. It's African American influence in some ways, kind of taking over the mainstream and then being appropriated by the likes of the Kardashian sisters and other people. And then there's this new fascination with going to the gym and becoming really well toned and having a toned ass. But then I'm like, but the toned ass is still plump with collagen, so I don't really understand. Like, they go to, like, the doctors, have the fat sucked out, pumped it to the ass, and then the next thing you see is that they're doing squats, and they're like, squats really help, If you want a plumper ass, do squats. And I'm like, I've been doing 50 squats a day. I haven't seen any results. So I can't see it.
So that is literally something you aspire to, or is it a joke?
No. Well, I don't aspire to that, but it's something that it does play in my mind a lot, though, because sometimes I'm like, I just, I don't know, I'm still a woman. Like as much as like I can be very serious and very like, and be very like intimidating about certain things. There's still things about my body. Like, my body is very personal to me. Obviously, I work with my body a lot. So, for me, it's like my friend. Mm-hmm. So, sometimes I think, what would my body be like? But then at the same time, I'm just like, I can't even, I don't even like going to the GP. Never mind booking an appointment to go to the plastic surgeon to have my ass pumped. Why? I don't understand what that would do for me, other than I would have to perform with it, and then I would find a reason to complain that my ass is shaking too much in the performance. So I just think, nah, it's not worth it. But it's a kind of insecurity that's becoming like a project. During times in my life when I go through the insecure moments or the crisis moments, these are the kind of things that play in my mind and then become like something that for a very short period in time, I will aspire to have the perfect ass. And then I will snap out of it and be like, why? This is ludicrous. How can you have a perfect ass? Like, who cares? Like, your ass. How can the ass become this golden, like, trophy? I don't understand this. And then I'm like, Viv, this is madness, Like, come on. But then I look on Instagram, I'm like, whoa, that's a big ass.
That's great.
Oh, God. Yeah, so. Yeah, that's me. That's me.
Well, it sounds really interesting. I look forward to seeing more of your assets as they get developed around this project.
Switching gears a tiny bit, I just want to know more about what inspires your work more generally, or what are you working on at the moment?
I'm really inspired by just generally like life, like everything, like conversations that I have with people, the people that I meet, the images that I see. A lot of it comes from a political kind of interest. Like, I like to listen to where people are coming from and why people make decisions about certain things when it comes to the politics of like existing in society, like, things like refugee crisis, why people say it's not okay to allow them in, and yet, condemn like what they would class as third world leaders who prosecute their own people. And, like kind of looking at the human psychology of these things and how politics of living in a westernized country, westernized society is very damaging to people's real, like, intellectual kind of process, which is a process that I think in my head, or the way that I've experienced it in England, is it's a process that has become very much very informed by a media outlet rather than actually wisdom, like a wisdom that comes from experience. Like in Africa, like in Nigeria, as a child, you're brought up in a community and you learn from the community, and then you kind of learn to have a voice in a way. And although like African beliefs and African Nigerian Igbo way of being is a lot different and somehow can be quite damaging to a young person because of the pressure that's put on you to achieve the best, without actually giving you the right foundations to some degrees on how to be the best in whatever you do and be happy. I still think like the ethos and the morals are a lot stronger than they are here. And I feel that often people will challenge things that you wouldn't normally challenge here. And they will challenge it openly, knowing that potentially the risk of them challenging it openly could be death. But whereas in England, I feel like it's more of a bitch society. I say everyone complains, but nobody really does anything,
Right. Yeah.
Because I just say, going to vote when voting is enabled is not enough. I don't think. I feel like, that's just a very systematic way of saying, yeah, you may not like what you're getting, but you're going to have to do what we say, and you can just choose to vote who you want. But either way, you're going to still have to do what we say.
Yeah.
And there has to be more,
So what is it that, do you think that your work is doing more?
Well, I think that somehow my work is like highlighting things that people have forgotten or have chosen to forget. Like because I can't make work about things that I don't know or experiences that I haven't had. Most of the work that I do is from my own experience and from coming from my own cultural heritage. And because I feel very strongly about my roots, so my work becomes about me kind of understanding that root and at the same time finding it difficult, like, to deal with like some of the misogyny within that culture. And I think that westernized people don't know, a lot of people in the UK don't really know what African culture or Igbo or the diversity within Africa. I think they have a very kind of one systematic view of what Africa is, and they don't realize that Africa, or certainly Nigeria in itself, is shaped by lies in some ways, but the truth of Nigeria lies within the cultural practices of the individual people that live in Nigeria. And it's also about bringing like an awareness of British influence in terrorism, because I think this is the thing. This is a thing that I feel very strongly about right now, is that there's a lot of talk around terrorism, but no one really looks at where terrorism started. For example, look at Nigeria and the history of Nigeria, and I look at the history of terrorism within Nigeria. It's all goes back to the Queen, because it's all about systems. And so I make work that will talk about those things, because I can't lie. Like, I just think, I grew up in a family where my grandfather fought in the Biafran War. My mother's father was in the UK and was told that if he didn't, if he was seen sponsoring or somewhere celebrating Biafra, he would be sent back to Nigeria, which would mean that he would be killed, because essentially, if you're an Igbo person during that time, you were an enemy of the country. And all these things. And yet, England were publishing crap about, let's save the children, send money, Red Cross. There's contradiction. And that pisses me off, because I live in this country and I love England as much as I love my culture. But at the same time, I think, there's a lot of bullshit that people think is truth, when really there isn't much truth. There's not much truth out there now. And I feel like my practice has to be about creating a space where people can be challenged to just go and find out for themselves. Like, I'm not saying this is the absolute truth and this is what you must believe. I'm saying get up and look for it yourself and ask yourself the questions that you would never have asked yourself before.
Yeah, I saw that at Rich Mix you did something about Biafra and Brexit, and so what was that? Tell me about that, because I didn't get to see it.
That was kind of, I played around with the title. It was focusing more on the Biafran civil war, because I come from, essentially I'm a Biafran, but we are known as the Igbos in Nigeria. And I was looking at it, I've always, as I said, my grandfather fought in the war, and I grew up being told about the damages of Biafra and the sadness. I think that the thing that was sad was it was not just the effects of the Nigerian military and what they did to the Biafran people, but it's also what the Biafran people did to themselves. And I was interested in this idea of power and play and repetition, and how repetition can create a system and a space of, like, when you repeat something so many times, you forget that perhaps that thing could be bad, and you just kind of carry on doing it. Also, I was really intrigued by, when I had started doing all the research and collating the research, I was interested in, like, the fact that during that period of Nigerian civil war, my father's family lived in Nigeria, and therefore my grandfather fought. And then my mother's family lived in England, and therefore my grandfather from my mother's side was forced to deny his identity. And it was weird, somehow both families collided and came together. And obviously we were born, and now after we are more or less, I am the third, fourth generation after the Biafran, observing the effects of Biafra in Nigeria, and asking myself, why isn't this been talked about? And then realizing that it's not been talked about because Britain doesn't want to own up to the fact that they were part of the massacring of Igbo people, the Biafrans as well. And the fact of, the casualty of war is always the children and women. And it's the fact that a country like England can be so, I don't know how to explain it. They're almost, during that civil war, they employed this kind of weapon which was more evil and more damaging than being shot, which was hunger. By blowing up the farms, the places where the Biafrans could get access to food that was coming in from different parts of different countries that were trying to support them, it meant that basically they were starving them out. And yet all over the newspapers during that time in the 60s in America, there were these images of starving Biafran children with the big head and the huge bloated stomach and the really skinny, stick-like hands. And nobody was saying that England was blowing up the food camps, essentially, as a Nigeria, we're going to support you. So I created the performance to start that conversation because it's not something that's discussed by many Igbos either. I don't know why. I think lots of Igbo people don't want to discuss it because they feel somehow there's a shame because they lost the war, because they didn't get what they wanted. And therefore, it's not something that you should discuss because it's something to be shameful about. Whereas I see it as it's not something to be shameful about, it's something to look at and discuss and let the generations know so that we can understand what's going on as well, so that we don't become ignorant, become so focused on what we have now. But we know what we have now, but also know what happened then and where we as a generation of Igbos have come from and what happened to even bring our country, Nigeria, to the state that it's in. So I was interested in that, and so I kind of made that performance. It was 1 hour of me just basically sort of doing a repetitive action for an hour, and I found it hard. But I think it's it's a project that I definitely want to develop further.
Wonderful. Okay, well, thank you so much for your time.
It's been really great talking to you. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to this conversation, and I want to say thanks again to Chinasa for allowing me to share it, despite the fact it wasn't recorded with this kind of public dissemination in mind. So thanks again to her for that.
Next time on Multiple O's. Next time on Multiple O's.
And if you're wanting to know more about how Chinasa's work has developed and changed since 2017 when we recorded this discussion, well, you're in luck. As I said at the start, we've carried out a new interview, and next time on Multiple O's, I'll be sharing that with you. So that's something to look forward to.
Next time on Multiple O's.
In the meantime, I hope you'll accept yourselves, your lives, and other people. We're all just fallible human beings. Ta-ra!